to welcome Mr. Adam Phillips to the site. He's come before and done some talks for us, so welcome. Adam, as lots of you will know, has written an awful lot of books. 23? Yeah, 23, I think I went down, I counted. 23. And has edited all sorts of other things, for instance, the collective works of Freud. Yep. How many times did you have to read The Interpretation of Dreams?
I read it 4 times in 1 year.
Right. Did it get better?
It did, actually. It definitely got better.
Adam's book has recently come out, Attention Seeking, and it's one of those books that just goes in so many directions that you could dwell on it for hours and hours and hours. And what I would like to do is to look at just 2 or 3 aspects of that book. And the first one is particularly to do with Masood Khan and his ideas, his paper, The Grudge and the Hysteric, which is a fantastic paper, particularly where the hysteric is the kind of patron saint of attention seekers. And then secondly, we're going to go on and speak about James Baldwin, and about shame, and about difficulties in relating and showing affection, maybe. And then thirdly, we're going to speak about Marion Milner, if that's okay, because I know the latter 2 are very close to your heart. Adam says that I can ask him anything I like within reason, so that's
without reason.
Without reason. That's an interesting challenge in itself. Firstly, I'd like to ask you about how you managed to give such good attention, because I've been sitting in your room either twice a month or once a month for 20 years, and I've never ever had the experience of anybody paying attention to what I was saying as much as you were. How do you do that?
Well, thank you. Obviously, I don't really know. I mean, when you said it, I thought 2 things. One is, when I was a boy, across the road from where I lived, there were woods. And I used to sit in the woods, not sometimes by myself, sometimes with friends, but I would sit there. And the longer you listened, the more you heard. So when you go into a wood, you don't hear anything, just a few birds singing a song. The longer you sit there, it's amazing how much sound there is in the wood. And that always really got to me, really interested me. So that's there. Like probably most people in this room, I've always liked music. That's an element, I'm sure. In my family of origin, people talked all the time. And there was a lot of talk, and therefore you had to some extent, fight to talk, but also fight to listen. I think much of that was in there. I was also taught to read very well at school and university. And for me, reading is linked in some way with listening, even though, of course, they're different. But there is some sort of internal listening for me when I read. So I think all those are sort of ingredients. But it does come naturally, you see what I mean? It's not something I feel like I've learned, or I must have learned it a bit.
Is it something we can learn, do you think?
I think people can be made more or less attentive. I mean, in a way, that's what psychoanalysis is. People can be more or less attentive to the ways in which they need to distract themselves, and to the ways in which they need not to listen. And so I think, in a way, psychoanalysis is an education in listening, both to yourself and to other people.
In relation to Masood Khan, who is somebody we've spoken about before a few times, and is not an uncontroversial man, I just wanted to run one line past you and see what you thought. Masood Khan, when speaking about Grudge and the Hysteric, says, "Why does the hysteric's inner life become a cemetery of refusals?" Which I think relates very much to attention seeking.
Well, in terms of Kahn also says, I think in a later paper about hysteria, that, the question is, why are the so-called hysteric symptoms so sort of florid? And his idea was that the hysteric is a person who doubts that they can find a place in someone else's mind. And it fits in a way with this paper, because what Kahn is saying, I don't want to go into this in great length, but what Kahn is saying in that paper is that the so-called hysteric sexualizes dependency out of an anxiety about being unmet, unthought about, understood, and so on. So that things that were originally, in Kahn's language, ego needs, either wish to be comforted, thought about, understood, helped, etc., become sexualized excitement after puberty. What then happens is that somebody who has a kind of sexualized solution keeps on not getting what they want, because they, as it were, consciously think they want a certain kind of sexual sensual excitement, whereas in fact they want a lot of other things as well. So sex is being used to do a lot of things, but unwittingly. So that the cemetery of refusals, I think, it's harsh in a way, because this so-called hysteric, the figure that Kahn is partly inventing, is somebody who has to refuse external exchange out of anxiety of frustration. So there's a continual inability to broach real exchange and a continual longing for it. So there's a lot of rage here too. But I think the cemetery of refusals idea is that it's not that somebody has an incapacity, but they're too frightened not to refuse.
So success would be problematic.
Success would be problematic because success would be a reminder of the ongoing experience of dependence. And so, I mean, it is, of course, linked to attention seeking because, it's, in a way, it's an obvious point that the book's partly built around, which is that we're all sitting here now because we were sufficiently good at attention seeking and that somebody was sufficiently attentive to the attention that we sought. So it's a very strange thing that attention seeking is disparaged. And people often say about children, well, the trouble with him or her is very attention seeking. You think, good. Because, it's always the children who are silent that one has to sort of worry about in these circumstances. So that, in a way, the hysteric in this story is the example of somebody who needs to do a great deal of attention seeking to test the environment, to find out, it's like a love test. Are people able to respond adequately? It's a probe.
Are they very successful normally at sort of choosing people that might yield this attention?
Well, I think, we both know this, but there's a problem with they here. But if we just take this as a fictional character, called hysteric, or an allegorical character, I think they are, it depends on their luck. It's very likely, on the basis of a kind of unconscious repetition compulsion, that these people are going to be very adept at finding people who frustrate them in familiar ways. But of course, anybody at any point can get lucky. And somebody might respond differently, or unusually, or unexpectedly, in a way that means something. And then the conversation opens up. Otherwise, it's all repetition.
Do you sort of... I was thinking about your work, and this book is very sort of, quite sort of, it could have been written 50 years ago, do you think? Do you think it's sort of...
Say a bit more about that.
Your books are quite timeless in quite an abstracted kind of a way. They're about what people do with each other, how we negotiate with other people, how we take up our place in the world. And I just wonder if you have a sense of sort of psychoanalytic time being contemporary or not, or I know you to be quite a political man, but you don't write about politics, for instance, the changing sort of subjectivities.
Yeah. I think I've always been, it's part of generation I think, but I've always been wary of the grandiosity of psychoanalytic people talking about politics. Because it's not obvious to me that there's a good translation here. I do think, I think the book, to me anyway, the books are timeless in the sense that what I'm doing in these books is reinventing the wheel. you see what I mean? But the wheel, I think, is worth reinventing, but it's going over a lot of old things. But I think really psychoanalysis must have stopped for me in about 1969, I would have thought. In terms of writing, I read things, I've read things subsequent to that. But I think the bit of psychoanalysis that I loved and love is that middle group, including Marion and Kahn and Winnicott. So that's the bit that first got me into this, and has still, will probably get me out of it, so to speak, got me through it. And so even though there are a lot of analysts, other analytic writers that I'm very interested in and so on, I think that's where I started, and that's where I seem to go back to.
Yeah. Do you often come upon things in more sort of recent times that you think?
I do. I mean, I sort of crave. I don't know quite so much.
You mentioned the wheel.
I had a long period of craving really good psychoanalytic books or papers, and I very, very rarely found them. Now that could be me. It's not a comment on the world. This is not me. But there were and are always psychoanalytic writers that I went on loving, that I like, writers. So for me, it was of a piece. I'm not very into theories in that sense, but I am interested in writers, in individual voices. And so there are people that go on being interested in that regard. Obviously, French psychoanalysis that made a huge difference to me, to show everybody here. And American psychoanalysis too, but for me it was to do with individual voices, not to do with particularly worked out theories. I just liked some languages more than others, I think.
Because I've noticed from conversations with you that your thinking is a lot more informed by philosophy now than I think it probably was.
Yeah.
Do you think that's fair?
I think that's probably true. What I read mostly is poetry, history, and philosophy. I used to read much more psychoanalysis. I still do read psychoanalysis, but it goes in and out of focus. Because I love doing the work, but I don't always love reading the writing.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I remember you saying a while ago that you sort of continued doing your A-levels, really.
Yeah, that is exactly what I've done. I did English, history, and biology, and I just go on doing my A-levels.
Yeah.
Because they seem endlessly interesting.
Yeah. And you've sort of stayed faithful in terms of the...
Yes, I mean, I do occasionally read new things. I don't know.
No, clearly from the book.
But yeah, I do read other things, but there seems to be... I mean, I think I said that, I've said it in the book, but there seem to be writers that are a bit like recurring dreams. You sort of keep going back to them because you want to go on thinking about them, whatever they are, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's the effect for me, I think.
Yeah. Because I thought that this book was the first one where you'd kind of managed to put Freud slightly to the side a bit more.
Yeah.
I remember you saying a while ago that when we sort of get curious about this stuff, when we go along to study something somewhere, we learn that they are a sort of a declining place or whatever their theory is. And we can get very impressed by that. And we think, oh, they have all the answers. And, if only I could do that well enough, then I'd be one of the made guys. I'd be in.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that, because when I was writing the book, so I realised something. I don't mean it's true, but I realised something, which was that if you overhear or read Lacan, Winnicott, Klein, the New Testament, Marx, whatever it is, the first experience is, if you like it, this is amazing. This really explains a lot of things, etc. And it's like sort of benign trauma, as in, if a trauma is an untransformable experience, the risk is you get stuck there and you become Lacanian or Christian, which means you can't actually work through the process of eating it and digesting it and seeing which bits you like and making something of your own bit. So a Freudian would be somebody who's frightened of Freud. It's like an identification with the aggressor. So that in a good psychoanalytic education, my version of it, you couldn't be a Lacanian or a Marxist or a Freudian or whatever. You could only be somebody who gravitated towards the psychoanalytic theories that moved them or interested them. And then they would be digested or metabolized and turned into something. So that if anybody goes on simply repeating Lacan or Freud or whatever it is, they've got stuck. And that's exactly the stuckness that psychoanalysis was invented to re-describe. But it hasn't entirely worked within the training institutions.
Mm. So we sort of inadvertently can create our own sort of adherence, if you like.
Yes, or refuges, or
Yeah.
anxieties about, something like anxiety about thinking freely, but it's an anxiety about being able to, in Winnicott's language, give the writer one loves the full blast of one's hatred. You can bring your intelligence to bear as critically as you like, and you see what's left. Whatever's left is of use to you, and the rest isn't.
But doesn't Winnicott say that the point of psychoanalysis is to free you up from your habits and things, so you can actually be looser, even more distracted, as you say?
Yes, exactly. That you'd be able to be more vagrant in your own mind, and you wouldn't be too agitated about what might come into your mind.
I think a lot of people that do this kind of work feel that they have to have a kind of ballast of knowing something. They have to have an armoury of theory. And in supervising people, I often find that I'm trying to sort of free them from that a bit. And they ask, well, freedom into what? And it's very difficult to say what the what is.
Good question. But I think, I don't know if this is your experience. My experience is it's better for people to start learning lots of things, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
Because I mean, what would a non-essentialist psychoanalysis look like? Well, it would seem to me it's a very interesting question once you've read all the essentialist psychoanalysis. But you've got to do, I think, the best, what I really think is, it's only worth talking to the people you enjoy talking about psychoanalysis with. Really. That's the only game in town, as far as I'm concerned. Secondarily to that, I think if you're interested in this, why wouldn't you read Freud, like Klein, whatever, whoever you were moved by, and then see what you made of it. But you have to start that way round. You can't just turn up and do it, in my sense of it. Because it's too agitating.
Do you think it's impossible to speak with people who don't really know much about psychoanalysis,
Yeah.
You know, it's
well, we're doing it in clinical work all the time. In a sense. I mean, the most striking thing to me about working in child guidance clinics was everybody could use it. It wasn't at all. I went thinking it's a kind of middle class thing, more or less. And of course, the trainings were totally, when I did it, entirely white middle class. Really quite affluent, because you had to have money to do it. Well, I then worked in child guidance clinics and hospital departments and so on, and there was really, if somebody took to it, they took to it, irrespective of class, gender, race, etc. Some people really took to the conversation. And of course, some people didn't. But why would they? It's only for the people who like it.
Do you think about that time much, that 20 years in
A lot.
Camberwell child guidance? Is it child guidance?
Yeah, it's child guidance.
Yeah.
Because I feel, I mean, I went into this because I wanted to be a child psychotherapist. That was the thing. And then secondarily to that, in those days, there was a very idealistic, in the best sense, a commitment to the National Health Service. Because anybody could walk, literally. I mean, I started a walking service in Camberwell. You could walk in off the street, whoever you were, and you would be seen. And you would be seen for an indeterminate amount of time. Well, that seemed to me fabulous. That seemed to me really what it was about. So, I feel like, even though it would be sort of hyperbolic to say this, I learned everything doing that. But I learned a lot. Because in those days, there was less differential diagnosis, so you saw crazier people. You saw a larger range because people were less efficiently diagnosed and less efficiently then sent off to the experts in whatever it was. So there was a big range of people I would never have otherwise met in my life, and there were multidisciplinary teams. So it wasn't a rarefied psychoanalysis. I'd always be working with social workers, educational psychologists, psychiatrists, a whole range of people, and it was really interesting.
Do you can remember all of the people?
Oh yeah.
Look, I used to run children's homes and work in homeless places, and I can remember these characters so clearly still. They were almost incredibly individual and specific.
Yeah, what I fear and long for is bumping into some of those children who are adults now.
Because one of the problems of our work is that we never know where it ends up, do we?
No.
And I can remember these characters so clearly still. They were almost incredibly individual and specific. Yeah. What I fear and long for is bumping into some of those children who are adults now. Because one of the problems of our work is that we never know where it ends up, do we?
It's also a great thing about it.
Yeah, I guess it is in lots of ways. How many people here have read one of Adam's books? Stick your hand up. How many have read 5? Any 10s? You reckon? So that's a good lot. It's like an AA meeting, you know, I've been 10 years of clean, 12 years clean. Because your books really seem to speak to a certain, they grab the attention of a certain type of person that often doesn't really seem to feel they can find anything like it. Are you sort of aware of that, how you grab attention?
I'm not, in a way. I mean, it sounds disingenuous, this, but all I know about is I write these books. I write them because I really love doing it. And there's been a coincidence here, which is I've written these books, and there happens to be a market for them, so people can publish them. So that's like, I presume, a historical coincidence. And that then has its own momentum. I know which to be a writer, I want to be a reader, I still want to be a reader. But I wrote these books, and also it was a time, I didn't think of it like this, but I can remember a publisher saying to me that there was a kind of hiatus between R.D. Laing and Winnicott, and after that there was nobody, apparently, who was writing psychoanalytic books that were in any way in the public realm. You know, it became a specialisation. Then I wrote these books, and they weren't in the public. And then, you know, then that's what happened. And I think originally I wrote the kind of books I wanted to read, but it wasn't even as calculated as that. I wrote what I could write. So I remember sort of 20 years ago, you know, you were often in the Observer, weren't you? They put you out the front. You were front page once, weren't you? Fantastic. Would that happen now, do you think, with any? I doubt it. I mean, two things are true here. I don't want it to happen now. It isn't up to me, but I don't want it to happen now. And I just don't know. You just don't know who read the books.
Yeah.
And I mean, people tell you, but you have no idea, really.
Yeah.
Because my actual lived life, obviously, my family and friends.
So you have no idea who reads your books?
No, no. I mean, I meet people occasionally.
Yeah.
And obviously, I've been reviewed in the papers for years. But that's all you know. You see. And I do things like this. But more than that, I don't know.
But did you mind getting that kind of attention?
No, I liked it.
You like it? Yeah. It's good. Yeah. So why don't we sort of come home from work and have our partners say to us, how did your attention seeking go today? Did it go well?
Yes,
did people flirt with you? Did you go for lunch with interesting people? Did people laugh at your jokes?
But also, what were you wanting? I mean, obviously one wouldn't want to come home once more, so asking this question. But if we take this figuratively, I think the question would be, how good are you at it in your own terms? And how much do you know, or how much do you, in terms of getting feedback here, how much do you get a sense, increasingly, of what you might be wanting from other people? It's all about sociability, this.
Yeah.
And what people want from each other, and what people can do together. And so for me, the attention-seeking idea is always an experiment in living. It's always some kind of test, not calculated, of how someone will respond to whatever it is one puts into the world.
So it's an experiment, like an experiment in love, or if we think we're searching for love, we're kind of testing people out and prodding them and seeing.
When I went to teach in California last year, and I met a man in his 80s who'd been supervised by Winnicott, who trained in London, he was American. And he'd gone to see Winnicott for supervision before he'd seen his first child patient. And he was sort of a bit of a nervous wreck, as one might be. The next day he was going to see this 6-year-old girl. And he said to Winnicott, "What do you do?" Winnicott said, "If she offers you her hand, take it." And that seems to me sort of beautiful and interesting. And it's linked to this, because it's to do with what one makes of the gesture that's offered. You see what I mean? And of course with children, it's true with adults as well, but with children are very varied depending on who they are, tentative or bold about the kind of attention they seek, and about the gestures they make. And of course, they are totally dependent on the adult world for response. So when a child speaks to us or makes a joke or does anything with us, they're really not experienced people. And of course, there is familiarization. But if a child goes to a therapist, i.e. a new person, this is a really potentially traumatic experience. It doesn't have to be traumatic, but it is difficult. And so you're uniquely placed to see what the child's unconscious assumptions are about what gestures are possible and what responses will be elicited.
And how could a child calibrate these things, do you think?
I don't know if you can find.
It sounds like people are sort of doomed from early on to this eternal seeking, which can't set out with a cemetery of refusals.
Well, there could be that, but it might be true to say that inevitably, because growing up is also a cumulative trauma as well as whatever else it is, that one has a limited repertoire of ways of being social with other people. One grows up with that limited repertoire, and the interest of other people is the repertoire may be extended, and that's also what's fearful about other people. But that point where a period in the child's life where they notice there are pleasures outside the family, is a very big deal. Because that's when what's being experimented with is a new kind of response. And then, of course, a new kind of gesture, a new way of talking.
Yeah.
So when you go to school, for example, the first time, this is an extraordinary thing for this reason. Because suddenly you're in a world of different adults. And you're very dependent on their kindness and on their imagination.
You mentioned in the book about growing up where parents leave toys and things to play with and read lying around, but you said they also leave a morality lying around, which are kind of guidelines about how you might successfully garner a bit of attention, maybe.
But I like that idea that, and it's because it's obviously Winnicott's model for doing psychoanalysis, which is it's not exactly you leave things lying around, but you offer things up. And you see what people are interested in. And you see above all what they make of what's given. Because Winnicott says this thing, which is, it's not what the analyst says that matters, it's what the patient can make of it. And so, it seems to me a very interesting idea developmentally, that morality could be like that. It could be something that you pick up bits and pieces of, for reasons you largely don't know, and make something with it. As opposed to being, as it were, brainwashed into a dogmatic morality. As though you can internalize a blueprint of what to do when, as opposed to another way of doing it. Any more than you could, as a trainee analyst, you couldn't be taught what to say when. It isn't like that.
Yeah. Because the history of psychoanalysis is almost about sort of celebrating distractedness, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sort of, I'm thinking of sort of the Levinasian idea of two types of people. There's one that like to look down a microscope and reduce everything and do the biological fiddling around and taking things apart with scientific sort of precision so I can know what it is. That doesn't mean you know what it does or anything, but you can comfort yourself with the idea you know what it is. And infinitizers who look out the other way, a long lens, who are more interested in what life might make you feel and think. Two very different ways of sort of approaching things. It's not questioning that.
No, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because I think, in a way, in that example, if there are two ways, then I suppose one of the things you might be interested in, if you do what we do, is the way in which you need to actively, unconsciously narrow your mind to, it could be to sabotage your development or limit it. So if you were somebody who had the infinite view, the question then would be, what's the problem you have with the other view? In other words, how much is the chosen perspective chosen for what it excludes as opposed to for what it includes? And I think that's the kind of thing we can talk about in what we do.
Look, if I was a young person now with lots seem to be doing, they seem to choose to do computational, mathematical, data kind of stuff. and they get very good at it, and that they then get a lot of attention through getting very highly paid jobs and things. You know. Why would someone do an English degree now?
Yeah.
It's sort of, what attention might you get from that? Is it sort of faded?
I don't know. I would have thought so, but I think it doesn't. Well, it might matter to the people to whom these things matter, but cultures do change, and there are. For anybody who's read English literature and still likes it, whatever it is, then I think it would be a shame to be just regretful about this, or to be saying things like, "Why don't people read anymore?" It seems to be fatuous.
Would you get anxious if you were studying Middle English?
Yes, I mean, you could. I mean, there would be economic reasons why it might not be a great idea, but the most interesting to me would be that for whatever reason you wanted to do that. Something about that really got to you. And you could think in a way, that's one of the things we're doing in psychoanalysis, is helping people discover where their real enjoyment is, what they're really interested in, what really matters to them, such that they don't need to think about whether their life's worth living.
Or how to be bold enough to desire for yourself, rather than be looking at the other person to see if they're enjoying things.
Yes, exactly. Or being able to use other people's enjoyment as a clue about your own, but not as a guideline or an order.
Shall we move on to Mr. Baldwin and some shame?
Sure.
I think it's just very evocative, if that's okay. It's towards the end, and there's been an intense sexual and love affair between David and Giovanni. And
shall I just do a very, very brief plot summary?
Yeah, please do.
There's nothing more boring than a plot summary, just if you haven't read it. It's a simple story, which is David, a young American man, comes to Paris to escape, sort of get away from his father. He meets a woman called Hella. He gets engaged to her. She goes off to Spain. He falls in love with a very, very attractive Italian waiter called Giovanni. Hella then comes back, and David goes back to Hella. Giovanni then goes back to his old job with this horrible boss, who he then murders. Hella then discovers that David is in fact, whatever this means, gay, and they split up. And the novel ends with David knowing that somewhere Giovanni is about to be executed for murdering this man. But obviously the book is so much more interesting than that, but that's the bare bones of the story.
There's some quite beautiful passages, aren't there, about how hard it is to speak about love, really. And this is one bit where David's trying to leave and feels very sort of confused. And he says, Baldwin writes, "I will not forget the last time he looked at me. The morning light filled the room, reminding me of so many mornings and of the morning I had first come there. Giovanni sat on the bed completely naked, holding a glass of cognac between his hands. His body was dead white, his face was wet and grey. I was at the door with my suitcase. With my hand on the knob, I looked at him. Then I wanted to beg him to forgive me, but this would have been too great a confession. Any yielding at that moment would have locked me forever in that room with him. And in a way, this was exactly what I wanted. I felt a tremor go through me like the beginning of an earthquake, and felt as for an instant that I was drowning in his eyes. His body, which I'd come to know so well, glowed in the light and charged and thickened the air between us. Then something opened in my brain. A secret noiseless door swung open, frightening me. It had not occurred to me until that instant that in fleeing from his body, I confirmed and perpetuated his body's power over me. Now, as though I had been branded, his body was burned into my mind, into my dreams, and all this time he did not take his eyes from me. He seemed to find me more transparent than a shop window. He did not smile, he was neither grave nor vindictive, nor sad, he was still. He was waiting, I think, for me to cross the space and take him in my arms again. Waiting as one waits at a deathbed for a miracle one dare not disbelieve, which will not happen. I had to get out of there, for my face showed too much. The war in my body was dragging me down. My feet refused to carry me over to him again. The wind of my life was blowing me away. Au revoir, Giovanni. Au revoir, mon cher. I turned from him, unlocked the door. The weary exhale of his breath seemed to ruffle my hair and brush my brow, like the very wind of madness. I walked down the short corridor, expecting every instant to hear his voice behind me, pass through the vestibule, past the loge of the still sleeping concierge into the morning streets. At every turn I took, it became more impossible for me to turn back, and my mind was empty. Or it was as though my mind had become one enormous anaesthetised wound. I thought only, one day I'll weep for this. One of these days I'll start to cry. It's beautiful, isn't it? Really quite stunning. This book is very much about shame, isn't it?
Yeah.
David's shame. And you write beautifully about it.
What interested me about lots of things are interesting about the book. But one of the things that I thought really interesting about the book was that in the book, Baldwin says that the problem for David of his homosexuality wasn't exactly his homosexual desire, it was his wish to be affectionate to a man. As though, and it links in a way to the Khan thing, as though his real terror was what was involved in living an affectionate gay life.
Mm.
And that the desire, in a way, was refuge from the affection.
Mm.
And that seemed to me really, it's very powerful and moving, but it's also really interesting. Because one of the things about an affectionate life is there's no triumphalism in it, as there can be in a sexual life.
Mm.
And in the book, it seems as though when shame is referred to, as it's quite a lot in the book, it's as though shame, when people feel ashamed of themselves, they've recovered their sort of core morality. As though when they can feel shame, they can remember their best version of themselves.
Mm.
And it's very strange in the book, because it makes it very clear, I don't know whether this is intentional on its part, but shame is also very conservative. That in a way it guarantees that there's no news. Because when you're ashamed, and I write about this in the book, but when you're ashamed, it's as though you know what your real morality is.
Mm.
As though there's something in you will remind you, will recenter you.
You can't wriggle out of it.
Exactly, you can't wriggle out of it. And yet, if we give this 2 minutes thought, we'll know that 10 years ago or 10 minutes ago, people were very ashamed when they felt themselves to be gay.
Mm.
They don't feel that now. So that's an example of capitulating to shame as a social regulation.
Mm.
So shame could be the most difficult thing to think about, not a guaranteed indicator of an essential morality.
Mm. You write about how it fixes you to the spot.
Yeah.
Shame. It's kind of mortifying. It's,
You can't
It's
think.
like you want, beam me up, Scotty, get me out of here.
Yeah.
Hold on the floor, please.
Yeah.
Someone's got you. They've got you fixed in some kind of position where you just can't wriggle. You
Yeah.
can't escape.
And it makes you wonder there, which is the most monstrous? The shamed person or the shamer? Because clearly the shamer is a torturer.
Mm.
The shamer is really murderous. And you can see how the abjection of shame is obviously, in a sense, a refuge from the terror. But I think that the point in the book is that, it's what you describe, which is that the thing about shame is it feels as though it's impossible to think about, or there's nothing really to talk about. We'll just all acknowledge you did a terrible thing. There it is.
Mm.
Well, this is actually very strange, certainly very strange in a psychoanalytic context, because it's the psychoanalysis that I would value would be one in which people were willing to explore these, explore these things, so that anywhere you found yourself with the need to stop going on thinking or speaking.
Mm.
That's going to be where the action is, or one of the places where the action is.
Mm. Shame seems to be like a moment of exposure where the lights are on you and you've fully been kind of unavoidably tied to your behaviour and your ideal.
Yeah. Yes, and what it
Notice
exposes
that gap.
But then what it exposes is how much work you've been doing to adhere to a particular picture of yourself. So when it's compromised or violated or betrayed, you are mortified. And in a way you would think, well, it doesn't feel like this. But the interesting thing about shame experiences is they expose the tyranny of one's internal ideals. They might also reveal what matters to you most. I mean, it's one thing, it's not one thing or the other, but it is several things. And it makes it clear that one's been sort of addicted to unconscious models of a preferred self. And you may want to think about that.
Is that sort of the same as a kind of false self, that we're kind of having unrealistic ideas about how we should be, in a sense, and we just can't match up? We're doomed to a kind of, like the hysterics dooms this perpetual cycle of sort of failing to get the attention, or failing to get the person to really notice what they need. Is it, you know, it's like a kind of sort of perpetual failure, isn't it? It's
well,
quite,
there is, but
quite sadomasochistic.
Well, it is sadomasochistic, but what's interesting about this is that it's not unlike Marxism, which is Freudianism is extremely deterministic. And yet Freud practices psychoanalysis because he believes somewhere that it's possible to intervene, to modify. That there's a repetition compulsion, but also it can be modified. And that seems to me what we're doing. And people come because they're stuck in something that has become too painful. And that's what's being thought about, explored, elaborated, expanded is what's the repressed repertoire here? Why have you needed to narrow your mind in this way? Not that you can be anything or anybody, but there's a very specific project here of narrowing who you can imagine yourself to be, or you can live yourself out as.
Aren't we sort of completely scared of going mad so much we organise ourselves quite tightly? Do you think?
I think it depends.
Obsessions.
I know what you mean. But
I
think it depends, though, on your earliest experiences, I think. Because some people are frightened of being mad, and if they are, that's for very good reasons. But there's a broader thing, I think, which Bolus writes about, which is people being fearful of the complexity of their own minds. That we are in excess of ourselves, and the question is what we can make of that excess. And the advantage of a good psychoanalysis is it enables you to extend the repertoire of what you can let yourself feel, think, say, know, etc. And it can give you a clue about why you needed to preempt or preclude certain experiences, the risks you can't take and the risks you want to take.
I was reading the other day about the government's sort of data assistants who can scrape data off the right people's Google accounts and then manipulate them and sort of stuff like that. Do you think shame is, can we scrape it off our hard drive, you know, get rid of it, or there seems something quite irreducible about it?
Well, I think either that's true or that's what we're supposed to believe. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be very variable.
Yes.
But I think that it would be defeatist and punitive to settle for it too absolutely. That's all. I think that when somebody is ashamed of themselves, it's worth finding what it is possible to say about that, or what the possibilities are for redescription of it. Not as if to say, no, it's not shameful, it's wonderful. So much as to say, what's shame, what's the word shame, or the experience of mortification over-containing? Because there's going to be more to it than that, that you could be sure of.
Yeah. So, how about Marion Milner then? How does she figure in this? Because I know she's somebody who you were very impressed by as a young man. And she writes beautifully about attention and types of attention.
I think Marion Milner was, I think one of the things Marion Milner believed was that people come for analysis because they are unable to be absorbed in anything else but themselves. Because obviously if you're depressed or anxious, you're thinking about yourself all the time. And what Milner was interested in, among many things, was the insulation of symptomatology. And so what was it internally and or externally that sabotaged your capacity to be absorbed, to lose yourself in something, whatever it might be, and it might of course be a person, but that what are the preconditions for having to hold on to your boundaries so there can be limited exchange? And she was a very extraordinary person in her own right. And of course she was part of that psychoanalytic group, very much involved in it. She also, if you read A Life of One's Own, you can see that she invented psychoanalysis for herself and then she went into it. She really did come to a lot of it herself through her own introspection and conversations and so on. And then she became a psychoanalyst. And she was very, for me, I mean, apart from personally liking her very much, she was very impressive for me because she was a very good example of how, this is not the right vocabulary, but how psychoanalysis is a good servant but a bad master. That you need to use it to do whatever your own thing is, as opposed to simply sort of abide by it. And she really used it. She incorporated it in her own vision and her projects and so on. And you can see it in her painting, but also in her writing.
She was very interested in how we see, wasn't she?
Very. I'll tell you, just briefly, I'll tell you an interesting story about her in terms of seeing. The first time I met her, I gave a lecture at the Scribble Foundation, and there was an old lady sitting in the front row, a rather beautiful old lady, in an orange trouser suit. So I give this lecture. At the end of the lecture, this woman comes up to me, and she says to me, completely straight, "I knew from reading your Winnicott book that you would look like that." And I said, because it was rather odd thing to say, I said, "Who are you?" She said, "I'm Marion Milner." And it was amazing because the sense I had was that A, she'd obviously imagined me, concocted something and I might read the book, but she'd also looked at me. And then she said to me, "Would you come and talk to me, with me about Winnicott?" And so there was a period in my life when she was in her, it must have been the early 80s, when I went on a Saturday afternoon. And she drank whiskey, so I drank whiskey with her, and we talked for about 2 or 3 hours. And she would talk, I mean, she literally, not literally, she talked about anything and everything. She was really open-minded. Her mind was open at both ends. And she wanted to talk. And she was still, as far as I could tell, so I had never known her as young, I hadn't read her, but she was the woman who wrote, you know, A Life of One's Own, age 30, was very like the woman of 80 who I was talking to. She was completely absorbed in these preoccupations. And it comes through in the writing.
She sounds amazing.
She was amazing. She really was.
Who else did you bump into early on then? Did you Matsu Khan?
I knew Khan was my analyst. I met through Khan Andre Green and Pontius. But I was also taught by Francis Tustin. And there was some, and through the Winnicott book I met Rycroft and so on. But it was the end of something, you see what I mean? And
was Winnicott still going?
No, I never met him. He died in something like 74. So there was still, some of those people were alive, and but they felt that their world had ended psychoanalytically, and sort of had. Partly because, I mean, I didn't know anything about this world then, but they felt that the Kleinians had taken over the Institute, and that nobody was going on with the middle group, apart from Kip Morris, who was American and came out of a sort of psychoanalytic tradition. And it was amazing to me as a boy to meet these people. Amazing. Because these were people, I obviously read their books. I didn't think you could meet them. And by a whole series of coincidences, I met those people. They were very interesting and inspiring people. If you're interested in psychoanalysis, they were really interested in psychoanalysis.
Sounds like they were very generous.
They were extremely generous, and they were extremely generous, I think, and I was one of these people, to young people who were interested. Very unpatronising and very undogmatic. And it was a real breath of fresh air, because I was taught by some wonderful people, as we all were, and some terrible people. And the terrible people were really terrible. They weren't just terrible, they were real bullies, and they were really sentimental. And you were being taught what to say and how to do it. And so it was really split. I don't know what other people's experiences, they must have changed. But there were wonderful people, the people for whom one thought one was going into this for, people who wanted to talk, and then the people who wanted to tell you what to do. And it was astounding to me, because obviously I was 15 in 1965 or whatever. So if you lived through the 60s, you couldn't believe the self-importance of these people and their authority. They really talked as if they knew what they were talking about. It was startling to me. But I also was a child, you see what I mean? I was in my early 20s. And so it was tricky, this. But the good people...
It's amazing they accepted you, because I tried to go and train in my 20s, and I was told to piss off for a few years and go and get some life experience.
Well, I wrote to the Institute, because I knew nothing about this world. And I wrote to the Institute when I was 22 and said, I'd like to train to be a psychoanalyst. And they wrote a really sweet letter back saying, we're delighted you want to train to be a psychoanalyst, but we think you're a bit young. So why not just do a few other things and then reply? And which was very nice, etc. And then I discovered there were child trainings. And I knew I wanted to do that. And then the child trainings were more open in the sense that they took people who'd read literature and history and stuff. You didn't have to do psychology or be a medical doctor.
We're going to have to finish in a minute this bit, but could we end with your Masood Khan story, the one with when he gave you a little tug?
Well, it's very brief. When
I think there's something in it that's just so...
No, fine, I'll come to say. Obviously, I lay on the couch and he sat behind me. And sometimes, I noticed I had long hair, and sometimes when I resisted, he would pull my hair from behind. He was sweet, this was entirely affectionate. He'd pull my hair and say, shut up and stop resisting. I know what I'm talking about. It was so funny. It was rather wonderful.
So you were trying to please him by coming up with dreams and things, were you?
Well, I was doing...
Did he notice something?
Well, what happened was, in the first session, I don't want to go on about this, in the first session, I lay on the couch and did what I thought was for associate press and put it away. And after 10 minutes of this, he interrupted me and he said, can I interrupt you, Mr. Phillips? He was very, very polite and courteous. I said, sure. He said, you haven't come here to tell me about your sex life, or to tell me about your dreams, or to free associate. You've come to say something significant. If you've got nothing significant to say, please don't talk. And I just thought that was so wonderful, so amusing, and sort of impossible. What could you do then? But
you're quiet for a bit, were you, after that?
Ish. But it really woke me up to something, and it was very provocative.
Well, thank you so much. I think that's going to come to an end there.
Would you say that now to someone? Would you say, look, if you haven't got anything to say?
No, I certainly wouldn't say it. And the trouble with the story is, of course, you've got so little context. And the story isn't, well, I don't know if it's more something than it sounds, but in the context of the relationship I had with him, and the man I met, it didn't even seem outrageous. It seemed, in the first instance, funny, which it sort of was. And then I thought, oh, what do we do now? And that, for me, was kind of thrilling, in a way. But I would never make that kind of nonsense. But he could do it in a very, it was very uncoercive. I didn't feel at all bullied, or mocked, or in any way sort of constrained. I thought he'd said at that moment what he thought. And now I can see what he meant. But it took me years, in a way, to see what he meant. But I wouldn't say that. I would say comparable things.
Yeah. Do you think he meant the noise? makes so much noise that you couldn't have anything significant, that you didn't have a chance to think.
Yes, I think it was a version of, look, you think you're free associating, this is actually unconsciously rehearsed. You know, free associating is actually not easy. It's not something to come in and do. And I think what he was drawing to my attention was that, I mean, he wouldn't have put it like this, but we've come here to have a real conversation about something. And we've come here to talk, not to chat, even though we did chat. And that it was like setting the tone of something, in a way. Because it wasn't as though, after that, I then sort of, never spoken to him unless I had something significant to say. I sort of more or less went on, as I had done. But he'd alerted us to something. And I knew at that moment that he meant what he said. That it wasn't said facetiously. It was said out of real conviction. And one of the things that was wonderful about him was that he never claimed to know what he meant. And he didn't claim he had no idea, but we both had an unconscious, so to speak. So he would be equally free to say, although, and he said this on other occasions, I don't know why I'm saying this, but... And it felt a bit like that in retrospect. But I knew he was right. Not right in some absolute sense, but he was onto something. Because I could feel it. It was like being stopped in your tracks.
Thinking about attention spans, as you were talking, because it occurred to me that this is probably the first time in about a week, 10 days, that I've had a solid hour without looking at my phone while doing something else. And I sort of wondered whether, in thoughts on, whether we are losing the capacity to truly pay attention in the way that you described at the start, whether it's the capacity of kind of changing shape.
Well, I suppose in a way it depends what kind of people we want to be. I mean, in the sense of, I would prefer to live in a world where people look at their phones less. But I don't mean by that I think people shouldn't look at their phones less. This is to do with the kind of sociability one wants. And I think that there's something to me deeply boring about people who are always moaning about technology. Because after all, it's a choice. You don't have to do it. But the other bit of this, of course, is that we are, of course, being induced to shop all the time. Because obviously every time you look at your phone, you're shopping, effectively. So that there's the infiltration of really neoliberal capitalism, which is be consuming all the time. Don't think about anything else but that, which I hate. I don't want to live like that. And it is the world we're actually living in. So I think people actually, it's like, addictions. I mean, people, I think, always have some choice. But there's a delegation of bad faith to say, I'm addicted. I can't help it. Well, if say, in this hour, you've enjoyed your attention, you could then replicate it. But you may want to go back to your phone. And who's going to tell you?
What do you think about addiction psychoanalytically?
Well, again, I think, like all these things, you really can't generalise. But I do think it's an extreme version of an anxiety about desire. That anybody who's addicted has narrowed their desire and got themselves into an omniscient state of mind where it's as though they know what they want. And it seems to me to be, it's going to be lots of different things to different people, but it's clearly, it's like enacting a malign dependence. This is what dependence felt like. Or this is the kind of dependence I'm now, this is my self-cure, there's something about dependence I can't bear. Because, everybody knows this, the problem of the alcoholic is sobriety. So, what's this a cure for? The problem is, of course, very quickly, the solution drowns the sense of what the original problem was. Very quickly, you think only about the drug, and that's the point. So, in psychoanalysis, I think one of the things one's doing, ideally, is reconstructing. What was this a self-cure for? And what were the preconditions for this being the chosen self-cure? Given there's a large repertoire of things one could do that are more or less debilitating.
One of our big problems is how to save people from their own self-cures.
And that's the calm thing is very interesting about this. where he talks about the most difficult thing is to cure the patient's self-cure. And effectively that's one way of putting it.
I'm a special needs teacher, and many of the children I work with have ADHD, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. But it occurs to me that the attention deficit is not only that they can't hold an object to their attention, but they also crave attention.
Yeah.
And I feel there's a correlation between the two, and I'm really interested to
Yeah,
hear
no,
what you
that's,
think about that.
I'm sure that's dead right. I mean, it was in the period when I was a child psychotherapist that ADHD took, and it suddenly appeared to be true for almost all children. And what seemed to me obvious, and I imagine is obvious to you, is that there are very good reasons why children are anxious. And they haven't got something called ADHD, they are anxious about things. And, as you said, the so-called symptom is what is, among many other things, an attempt to engage somebody in what this anxiety is about. It is, of course, in the best sense, attention-seeking behaviour. It's an attempt to mobilise the environment to engage with something. But the risk is, if the child is then given Ritalin, or one of these things, the child feels unconsciously or consciously fobbed off. Because the message to the child is, I can't bear this either. I don't want to know about this, so take this. You have the bone. So I think that the diagnosis is completely misleading. I think the only bit in it that's worth having is the anxiety word. I don't think it's a disorder, and I think that in the old-style psychoanalytic model, there are very good reasons why people's attention is interfered with. That's what it works about. But that, in a way, that's what Freud was showing and describing was attention is all the time being disordered. It's all the time being interrupted. And what it's being interrupted by is very, very important. It's not that if only we can get everybody attending properly, it'll be fine. I mean, there are very good reasons why children are anxious. And there are very good reasons why one might not want to attend in school. And they're both to do with what's going on at home and what's going on in school.
Thank you. I mean, they're autistic as well, my particular children, so there's that anxiety around that actual experience, which is another dimension, I suppose.
Yeah,
That's not cool.
Yeah, it's really.
So you're not a big fan of oppositional defiance disorder then?
Correct.
Okay.
In an experience of shame, there's a kind of memory of a version of yourself that you're not living up to. But I was thinking, it occurs to me that in the kind of worst experience of shame, it has to do with kind of undermining your faith in that ideal version of yourself, as in maybe that version is a sham, and in fact I don't live up to those kinds of ideals.
Yes, or I actually don't want to. I mean, I think that is the point. I think in a way that's one of the things that interests me about it, which is that it's, in the shame experience, one of the things that is at stake is your ideals for yourself. So on the one hand you could think, I failed. Or you could think, the ideals have failed me. They actually are not suitable. They don't work in my life in a way that I want them to. And it seems to me you need to be able to think about this both ways. That's all.
I was interested in what you said about the comparison between listening and reading, and wondering if you could say something more about how you read.
I think I read a bit like I sort of watch television. I mean, I was taught close reading, and I like it, and I know how to do it. But a lot of reading, for me, is like, it's a bit like sort of thinking. I mean, I do take it in, it varies obviously, but I take it in, but there's a lot of daydreaming going on as well, I think, while I'm reading. But I rely on the fact that, as it were, unconsciously I take in, so to speak, the bits that matter to me. And that I will make, that something in me will know what it is in the book or the text that matters to me. And I'll take that in, and something will be done with it. I don't mean it'll be productive necessarily, but I do believe that it's like a compost heap. Something will, and this is simply an act of faith, I assume something lands and something happens. But if I'm engaged, if I really want to read this, there's a reason. I don't know what it is, but there is a reason. Something about this gets to me. And things do come out in the wash. I mean, I can remember, for example, as a teenager, reading, because I was given it in a lesson, a bit of Darwin's work on worms. Then, 30 years later, whatever it was, it occurred to me to write a book called Darwin's Worms. And I had no memory of this at all, consciously, sort of. But I can remember, once I had realised this, reading this passage on worms and being sort of amazed by it. It really struck me. Now, there must be lots of examples where that hasn't happened, but there it did happen. So I do believe in sort of, unconscious digestion, or storage, or things being worked on. So one would have, if one was reconstructing this, you'd have a fantasy of some unconscious process or mind, or I could put it in lots of different ways, in which one's preoccupations are being worked out. And also, I don't remember most of what I read, and I don't try to. I was very
frightened them in the book, though.
I do, but when I write, I can remember what I read, but ordinarily I can't. And I can remember being terrified at school about having to learn things off by heart, because I felt as though I was being forced to put something into my body by somebody else, and I literally couldn't do it. I felt, of course, I could do it, but I really didn't want to do it. And so I experienced learning off by heart. I don't mean I think this is true of learning off by heart, but for me, it's like a violation. And I can only really believe in involuntary memory. In other words, what I happen to pick up, despite what I appear to be interested in. That's the bit I believe in.
In an experience of shame, there's a kind of memory of a version of yourself that you're not living up to. But I was thinking, it occurs to me that in the kind of worst experience of shame, it has to do with kind of undermining your faith in that ideal version of yourself, as in maybe that version is a sham, and in fact I don't live up to those kinds of ideals.
Yes, or I actually don't want to. I mean, I think that is the point. I think in a way that's one of the things that interests me about it, which is that it's, in the shame experience, one of the things that is at stake is your ideals for yourself. And on the one hand you could think, I failed. Or you could think, the ideals have failed me. They actually are not suitable. They don't work in my life in a way that I want them to. And it seems to me you need to be able to think about this both ways. That's all.
I was interested in what you said about the comparison between listening and reading, and wondering if you could say something more about how you read.
I think I read a bit like I sort of watch television. I mean, I was taught close reading, and I like it, and I know how to do it. But a lot of reading, for me, is like, it's a bit like sort of thinking. I mean, I do take it, it varies obviously, but I take it in, but there's a lot of daydreaming going on as well, I think, while I'm reading. But I rely on the fact that, as it were, unconsciously I take in, so to speak, the bits that matter to me. And that I will that something in me will know what it is in the book or the text that matters to me. And I'll take that in, and something will be done with it. I don't mean it'll be productive necessarily, but I do believe that it's like a compost heap. Something will, and this is simply an act of faith, I assume something lands and something happens. But if I'm engaged, if I really want to read this, there's a reason. I don't know what it is, but there is a reason. Something about this gets to me. And things do come out in the wash. I mean, I can remember, for example, as a teenager, reading, because I was given it in a lesson, a bit of Darwin's work on worms. Then, 30 years later, whatever it was, it occurred to me to write a book called Darwin's Worms. And I had no memory of this at all, consciously, sort of. But I can remember, once I had realised this, reading this passage on worms and being sort of amazed by it. It which really struck me. Now there must be lots of examples where that hasn't happened, but there it did happen. So I do believe in sort of unconscious digestion or storage or things being worked on. So one would have, if one was reconstructing this, you'd have a fantasy of some unconscious process or mind, or I could put it in lots of different ways, in which one's preoccupations are being worked out. And also, I don't remember most of what I read, and I don't try to. I was very
putting them in the book, though.
I do, but when I write, I can remember what I read, but
Right.
ordinarily I can't. And I can remember being terrified at school about having to learn things off by heart, because I felt as though I was being forced to put something into my body by somebody else, and I literally couldn't do it. I felt, of course, I could do it, but I really didn't want to do it. And so I experienced learning off by heart. I don't mean I think this is true of learning off by heart, but for me, it's like a violation. And I can only really believe in involuntary memory. In other words, what I happen to pick up, despite what I appear to be interested in. That's the bit I believe in.
I'd like to ask a question. In the book, I think it's only a couple of sentences, but you're talking about how quickly we can move from our shame to shaming. So you say it's a shame how easy it is for men to shame women. And so that made me think of some men I've worked with and the delusional jealousy that they can get into about their partner's past sexual experiences. And I remember a man once saying to me, my shame on her behalf is the hill I'll die on. And I wondered, because that really struck me at the time, and this idea that it's something we all do all the time. And with men, I think with this particular case, it was a defence against all the things he felt about women, really. His desire and his dependency.
I mean, when you said it, I thought, I can imagine why or how somebody would be ashamed of their omnipotence. I, the man, have to be everything to this woman. Therefore, she can't have a past. Now, obviously, everybody knows that there's nothing one can do about one's own and other people's past. But insofar as I need to totally possess this woman and be the sole source of her pleasure, it would seem to me that it's consciously or unconsciously, a knowing self-betrayal. Because actually I'm not omnipotent.
But that's also what we do in racism. That's also what we do in homophobia.
Yeah.
We're very practiced in doing that, in passing our shame on.
Yes, and you could say passing our shame on, but also by the same token, sort of passing on an essentialism. I know what gay people are like and I hate them. I know, so they're all it's as though there's a continual evacuation going on and an omniscient evaluation of what's been evacuated. And that then goes on and on and on. It can't be stopped until it's contained. But there are very, very interesting groups now of parents with autistic children and who make a very, very interesting case for what seems to me to be true, which is there are lots of different ways of being in the world. And one of them is so-called autistic. Doesn't mean we have to accept it totally on its own terms, or that we don't try and do things for children like this. But it does mean that we don't assume that there is a norm against which things are measured. Because the norm, obviously, it's all normative. But the question is, which norms do you prefer?
But that's what I'm thinking with psychoanalysis. Is it a very, like, it is a norm of its own as well, or like it's very defining in culture? And like, does that norm allow for like neurological differences?
Well, the answer would be,
or like for sort of conversation about
some people would say definitely yes. Some people would say you can't do psychoanalysis without that conversation.
Yeah.
But I think it's, all psychoanalysis is normative, whichever bit you are in. It's just a question of which of the norms you prefer. And so you'd find at one end of the spectrum, a psychoanalyst would say, I never want to speak to a neurologist, it's mumbo jumbo. And at the other end, you'd find people who would say, of course, we need a multidisciplinary approach to this. We can't exclude forms of expertise, because it's too limiting. The thing about diagnosis is they increase the cultural repertoire. So now we can all be autistic as a refuge, should we want to, as well as there being people who are, in an old-fashioned sense, diagnosed as autistic.
Yeah.
I was quite interested in your earlier on reflection about psychoanalysis being useful to lots of people and those who can use it, and how enriching those early experiences you had with lots of different people coming in and making use of the sessions was. However, I'm still quite struck at how white middle class it is, and how does one proceed to make that more accessible to the community?
Yeah, well, me too. I don't think it is about making it accessible. I think it's the wrong way round in a way. I think that I think there are lots of reasons why it's almost entirely white and almost entirely middle class. And I think that in a way, obviously people are more aware of this than ever before. But what's striking is how little it's changed. I mean, I've been doing this now for sort of nearly 40 years, 35 years, whatever. And it seems to me, and I've limited experience now, to have changed very, very little. And this seems to me to be astounding. I mean, I can remember going to San Francisco, 20 years ago, and being picked up at the airport by the people who invited me. And the man, who was a perfectly nice man, said to me in the car, "We've got a very, very liberal institute. We've got a gay trainee and a black trainee." And you think, now I don't know whether people would speak like that now, or they might think like that and not speak like that. But I think that in a way, the onus is going to be on people making it sufficiently interesting and alluring. There's got to be a good reason to come to something like this. And the onus is on the people who do it. And otherwise, people should do other things, if you see what I mean, or they should start their own groups, or do whatever's necessary. Because it seems to me to be sort of astounding that it's still like this. I mean, when I worked in Camberwell, most of the children I saw were Afro-Caribbean, and there was never a single black person working in the clinic. And it was unremarked upon. Now that was 35 years ago, whatever. I think it's unlikely that would be true now, I don't know. But there are reasons. There must be.
When James started talking about your book, he said how timeless your writing feels. And whilst I agree with that, I was wondering, you talk about the link between shame and misogyny in your book. And I was wondering, were people having conversations about that in the 70s? Because it feels so relevant, linking back to the earlier question about male omnipotence, and linking that maybe to racism and homophobia, and this could be such a useful discussion to be having.
Yeah. I mean, it was very striking to me, in retrospect, that I never heard the word misogyny used in child psychotherapy. And yet, all the time, one way or another, the aspersions were cast on the mothers. It wasn't that it was exactly a mother-blaming, I don't know what group, but there was a sort of implicit assumption that it was kind of up to the women. So that if, for example, there was a predatory or aggressive male around, the question was always, what's the mother doing to protect the children from the man? And it was all slanted like that, if you see what I mean. So no one would say, these women are terrible, they're ruining their children's lives. But they would say a very sophisticated version of that. And I think it must have changed, I imagine. But it was not at all around. And of course, the theory, the child development theory, is very strange in this regard. It's a real mixture. Because in Klein, for example, it's not that Klein sanctions misogyny, but she legitimates it in a certain sense. She shows you why we all can't help but be really violently and virulently misogynistic. And Winnicott, in a different sense, he talks about good enough mothers, and he's clearly on the side of mothers, not that he's really a rampant misogynist. But there is a sort of implication that, if you haven't had a good enough mother, you've kind of had it. And you may be lucky. But what that means is that the mother in this story isn't really a person. The question is whether she's a good enough mother in Winnicott's terms. And these are rather extraordinary ideas if you give them 2 minutes thought. They've got things in it. It's not that I think it should all be dispensed with, but I think it's really worth looking at differently. And perhaps on that note, we should stop.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. And thank you for your generosity. Lovely, thank you.